Thank you. Okay, so my name is Asia, spelled just like the continent, as you saw. My background I will absolutely get into. I have a whole slide especially for that. So definitely we'll talk more about what I've seen work for SaaS companies and software. But before I get into everything, all the things, quick show of hands, how many marketers in the room? Okay, healthy. How many founders in the room? Okay, so we've got kind of a little bit half and half. How many software SaaS? Okay, and how many are not software, not SaaS? Okay, no tea, no shade, no shame. That's okay. This is still going to be applicable no matter where you're at in your journey. This is still applicable whether you're in marketing, a founder, whether you have a fully scaled team, whether you are just one person coding and cranking away at the product. This is still going to be valuable for you. But first, I just want to kind of make sure that we get into why we're having this in the first place. So my background is in SaaS and it's in software. I did work for a consulting firm years ago, but we were primarily focused on software. And I've seen this time and time again. Doesn't matter whether you are enterprise, whether you are small biz, whether you are a solopreneur. What ends up happening 9 times out of 10 with marketing specifically, you read this blog post and it's like, hey, you should be blogging more. And you're like, crap, I should be blogging more. And then it happens again, and you read another blog post, and it's like, you should be doing AdWords. This is what you need. Your business needs AdWords. And you're like, okay, we should do AdWords, yeah. And you put $1,000 into AdWords, it doesn't work, you get frustrated, and you're not sure why. And then it happens again with Facebook ads. And then it happens again with tweeting. And it just continues to spin into a cycle of you are consistently investing into what feels and looks and kind of acts like marketing, but in the end, it doesn't give you the end result that you're looking for. And so the problem with this process is that, one, there's so much marketing advice out there. There's a ton. But what's going to actually be applicable to you is exactly what I specialize in helping companies build, but at the same exact time, it's something that I want to teach everyone, because to me, from what I've seen, we get caught up in this cycle. So what ends up happening is we're like, marketing doesn't actually work. It's not giving us what we want. We're not going to invest in it. And what ends up happening is if you're a startup, if you're a SaaS company, you wait too late to invest in it. One of the number one reasons why startups fail is because they run out of cash. But out of the top 5 reasons, it's because they're not able to find that product market fit yet. And part of this is because of product, but the other part is because of marketing and overall growth, investing in growth. Ultimately, the fundamental piece that's missing is the marketing strategy. And for the rest of this course, for the rest of this experience that we have together, we are going to talk about how do you define this, what should you be looking for, and how do you take the sea of tactics and actually put that into a strategy that makes sense. And also the reverse of the process. How do you create the feedback loop? How do you continue to iterate? How do you continue to grow and create things that scale? And I do use growth and marketing synonymously. And I realize that might be kind of confusing. When I say growth, if you've ever seen the hashtag broetry, hashtag the hustle, hashtag growth hacks, like you can do all these things to like hack your LinkedIn feed. I'm not necessarily talking about those very small channel specific things. I'm talking, when I say growth, I actually do mean increase in MRR or increase in revenue wherever you're at in your business. So I do just want to make sure that we're not, when I say growth, that you're not like, oh, okay, yeah, she's talking about like the Josh Vector kind of growth. No, I mean the actual kind of growth that impacts businesses, impacts lives, and ultimately scales and grows your company. So I just want to make sure that was obviously clear. But what I'm ultimately talking about, I'm talking about the foundational stuff. This is the stuff that when you implement into your business, the only real outcome is you either learn a very, very big, valuable lesson about your market, your product, and your business. And then the other piece is that you're obviously able to implement those things. And even if it's not perfect the first time, you still have the foundation in place where you can learn from it, you can grow on it, and you can expand on it. This is, at scale, this looks a lot different for companies that are much further along. But in the early stages, this is really the foundation that you're going to need to obviously grow and to be successful. So I realize that this text is super small, and I apologize. But why should you be listening to me? My career has been primarily focused on software, technology, and even more specifically in marketing. And I worked, previously I was head of marketing at a company called Hull, where we 10.5x'd in growth. So it was us, sales, and customer success. And then before that, I spent some time at Terminus. So shout out to my Terminus peeps. And I primarily worked on the Flip My Funnel side, where I was focused on demand gen for the community. And before that, I ran marketing at a company called ARC for 4.5 years. And this was focused very much on enterprise, $1 to $2 million deals, 1 to 2 year-long sales cycles. So very long cycles. Long enough that I was like, product's where it's at, because that's much faster. But I would say the number one reason why I'm passionate about this is because there's so much knowledge out there. But it's very hard for founders and marketers to apply a lot of this knowledge. And I've seen a ton of success. I've also made some awful mistakes. And I would love to help you guys prevent yourself, obviously, from making those mistakes. But then also the things that work, that you implement them. And that it's foundational, you understand it. And when you walk away from today, you're able to actually implement some of these things right now, right this very second. That's my whole entire goal. That said, everything that you've heard about marketing, I want you to forget about it. There's a reason why. I don't know your life. I don't know what you've seen. I don't know what you've been exposed to. I don't know what articles you've read. I don't know what you yourself have experienced. So for the purpose of today, and as we really break this down, for now, I just kind of want you to forget about everything you've heard, everything that you've read even. Some of that's helpful, it absolutely is. What I'm going to teach you is how to apply context to it, so it's actually valuable, and also, of course, that you can move forward. A lot of people think marketing is this, and this is exactly why I'm saying, forget everything you've heard about marketing up until today, and when you leave out of here, all that stuff can come back into your brain and you'll learn how to apply it. But some people think that this is marketing. Trade shows. Some people think that this is marketing. Direct sales, direct marketing, if you will, calling people up. There are some people in the world that like, yeah, that's marketing to them. And then some people think, yeah, Facebook ads, that's marketing. And then lastly, and I could continue on this forever, but some people are like, you know what, brand's where it's at. Brand is really what marketing is. Technically, all of these are marketing. But the point that I want to make sure that we iterate, and you'll hear me say this throughout the entire presentation, is that yes, all of those things are marketing. But the piece that I want you to remember is that it's really about your product, and for service people out there, if you're out there, this is about your service too. This is about your product, and it's about your target market, your customers, people who pay you money to do your business. And it's ultimately about engaging and connecting those two dots. That's really what marketing is. It's about you have this product, you have this service, you need to serve it to the people out there and make sure that they understand that you exist, that you care about them, and that they can actually buy from you. What does the process look like that? So that to me is the number one point to make. And this is just the iterative cycle, right? You have product or service, if you're service. You have product. You go into ultimately serving some target market, some customers, and you get feedback on that product. You understand what's working, what's not. You also understand, wow, this channel really didn't work for us, or this marketing strategy didn't work at all. You take that as feedback and research, and then you reapply it back to your product. And the cycle goes for as long as you're in business and beyond, until you sell or until you continue working on the business. But this is the very basic cycle. And really all of the marketing channels and strategies that happen around this is the number one job of the marketer, is to figure out how to continue the cycle, how to continue it growing, how to continue to find that audience, and building the relationship. It's the number one job. Also, and this is just a clarifying point, I do want to make sure that when I say target market, I also mean customers. If you are in SaaS and you've heard of ICP or Ideal Customer Profile, target audience, All of that to me is pretty much the same word, so I apologize if I use them synonymously, but just so you understand and just so you know, I do use those words pretty interchangeably. The only word that I would say does not fit into this is personas, which is really a very specific subsegment of your customers that you are trying to nail. But anyway, so I just want to make sure that was clear. But overall, if you're in software, if you're in SaaS, and really a lot of businesses I think that aren't by nature in software, they still have to operate on this plane, and it's the digital plane. If you think about it, if you have SaaS, if you have software, people aren't walking up to your house, knocking on your door and saying, hey, yeah, I would like to buy MailChimp, please. They're online. They're doing this on a website. So the way that you operate your business is obviously digital, which means that we're really looking at digital channels. The one exception, I would say, and this is kind of an exception, but one of the few exceptions is really events and conferences. So just like this is me to you guys. Technically, this isn't happening digitally, but someone's recording, and it eventually will be. Someone can consume it in the future. So still digital. But really, if you are SaaS software, there's really one of two models that you're probably in. You're probably in the self-service software, aka the free trials. So think of like, you're able to go to MailChimp.com, sign up for it immediately, and start using it and flying free. The other side of SaaS and software, again in this digital plane, is you might have a very complex product, and people can't just go buy it today. They have to talk to someone first. It might be built 80%, but in order for implementation to happen, the extra 20% has to happen. People can't just start using your product, and that's okay. Some models are better off that way. Some products are better off that way. But you really have kind of two scenarios. It's either fully self-service, or there's some customization, there's some implementation involved. Believe it or not, this actually matters for your marketing strategy. Because if you think about it, the customer journey is different. And we'll talk more about why and how this impacts what you're defining and what you should be looking at. But overall, these are pretty much the two examples. And these are the two companies that I typically think of whenever I think of this. So if you think about Landing Lion, how many of you guys have heard of Landing Lion? Yay, awesome. They're a really cool group. So landing pages, right? You go to landinglion.com, sign up for their service. You can immediately start using it. In 10 minutes, you're building landing pages. It's awesome. You don't have to talk to a salesperson. You can, if you want. But for the most part, you can go off, you can do your thing as a customer. And then you have Rigor. How many of you guys have heard of Rigor? Yay, awesome, cool. Which I would hope you have if you're in this building. Rigor, so much more complex platform. You can absolutely sign up for a free trial, but the platform is really only 80%. They can do some very custom implementation for you, which is really where the real value out of Rigor comes. So you could immediately start using the platform. You do have to talk to a person first. Slightly different model, because the customer experience is different. Someone can go off and immediately start using Landing Lion. With Rigor, it's a different model. Hull, my previous company, was the exact same. Data integration, very, very complex. You have to talk to a salesperson, though, if you want to leverage the platform. You couldn't just go sign up. Different model. No matter which one you're in, there's really two formulas to acquisition. And if you're early stage, this is going to feel bold, and I hope it does, because it should excite you. It excites me. You either need more free trials, so think of the Landing Lions of the world. You can go and self-serve, immediately do that. Or you need more demos. Seems really, really simple. And as we break each of these down into the formulas that you're going to need to start thinking about your marketing strategy, you'll start to see that they're very, very similar. Your approach is really different. More free trials. Okay, so the number one question that I get if you think about SaaS and you think about early stage, especially if you're just starting out, you either need more free trials or you need more demos based on your product, based off of your experience, based off of your product. Number one question I always get is, and we'll get into this, but well, how do I know which one I need? We'll absolutely talk about that. But to start, with more free trials, again, you're existing on the digital plane, you need more people to come to your website. That means that you need more traffic. That's just traffic. If you want more free trials, you need more traffic to your website. This is ultimately content and distribution. So the secret to traffic, more content, more distribution. And I am very much a stickler about content. I am very, very passionate about it. We will absolutely dig into what this actually means. But Ultimately, if you need more traffic to your website, you need content and you need distribution. But wait, what kind of content, Asia? Talk to us about content. A lot of people, whenever they hear content, they immediately think of articles, blog posts. But I want to take a minute and reframe this for you guys. Because content is more than just articles. It's more than just really cool tweets or Facebook posts. It's more than that. It's ultimately anything that a consumer can consume about your brand. This includes your website. Your website counts as content. Pages on that website count as the content. Yes, articles, blog posts, podcasts, webinars, that counts as content too. But you think about the global scale of your entire brand and what people can consume. To the developers in the room, if you're out there, that includes your documentation. That's content. Part of all of this, depending on your product, is probably part of your sales cycle and you had no idea. That said, yes, some of the more obvious examples are the courses that you can produce, landing pages, templates, videos, webinars, the full shebang. And there's even more kinds of content that we could absolutely get into, but I won't because I don't want to overwhelm you with how much you could be doing. My goal is to ultimately help you spearhead all of this so you can cut out the noise and you know exactly what's going to work for you. But what kind of content? Can't just be any content. Okay. To me, today, it's insanely hard to break up the noise. There's so much content out there. And people are pumping out mediocre content every single minute of every single day. That includes articles, blog posts, everything that we just mentioned. People are pumping out a lot of mediocre stuff. If you were lucky enough to be in the content boom back at 10 years ago, and if you were lucky enough to be able to just pump out a bunch of articles and get traffic and get free trials, then awesome, I'm really jealous. Because you got to experience something that most marketers today and founders today have to really break up the noise in and have to stand out. Drift is a great example of this, if you really like the Drift brand. Company, small, startup, broke up the noise. Same thing for Terminus and Flip My Funnel. Broke up the noise. Figured out a way to create things that really shook up the market. And unfortunately, to stand out, a lot of us have to do that. But what makes something high quality isn't necessarily how loud you are. It's almost purely how relevant you are, how engaging you are, how you're able to produce something that people actually want to see. This is really the key. We say high quality, but not everyone talks about what that means. Ultimately, it's what's going to be relevant to your audience. And I'm going to give you the exact steps on how to do that after our break, which is not coming up that soon. But after our break, it will happen, I promise. But I do want to iterate that this isn't just any kind of content. It's long gone are the days where you can just crap out a bunch of stuff and be like, yeah, sure, money's going to happen. Those days don't exist anymore unless you're shaking up a market that is archaic, which could be a thing. But for most of us, we have to stand out.
We do have a question real quick.
Oh, sure.
Back to your target market. So someone has asked, what's the best way to refine your target customer profile if your product is broadly applicable to many different customers?
Yes. If you have a product that is broadly applicable to many different customers, there is an activity that I'm going to describe that is ultimately going to help you source those, even if they're not customers today, source those prospects, if you will, people who haven't purchased yet, and interview them in a way that will enable you to understand, is this actually the target market that I want to nail right this very second? And if it's truly applicable, you will be able to create a marketing strategy that can apply to very broad people. But at that point, I think that you are looking at a much more advanced marketing strategy. So if you think of Squarespace, for example, Squarespace absolutely has a target persona, but their product applies to many different people. If you could be a business, or you could be just a random person who likes having a blog with pretty photos. Technically, they apply to many different people. It's all about positioning. I would argue, though, and we're going to get to this later on, I would argue, though, that if you really focus on one persona and cut out all of the extra noise, you'll still actually attract all of the extra people. If you think about there's an example that I'll leverage later on, but there are absolutely brands that have very broad strategies. But because they focus on one persona, they actually still attract everyone else. But because they focused on the one, they were still able to grow. As far as how we get there, definitely going to cover that later in the presentation. So stick around for that for sure. But there is absolutely a process that we can go through to accomplish that.
Cool, and I have one more.
Yes.
So as you're doing a lot of customer discovery, you're trying to hone in on that, we've got a question, like, how do you measure how much you say pivot or like basically iterate on those products? So like what are some of the tools you're using? And it's based on that research, feedback, et cetera. And I know you'll get into research, so
yes.
I might be ahead of the game on this, but if you want to speak a little bit to that, how you're measuring that.
The question is how we are measuring the activities in the product.
How much you pivot, iterate on that product based on the feedback and the research.
Yeah. One of my number one favorite surveys, research methods to leverage is jobs to be done, which we will definitely talk about because it's one of my favorites, and it's killer. But the other really big thing is adoption rate. So Unbounce is actually a great example. Unbounce last year realized that not enough people were using some of their conversion tools. And there are a few tools that I'll cover that are product specific that will help you track certain types of events and other activities in products that you may or may not care about today, but you might in the future. There's a few. But Unbounce is a great example, I would say, of a company that realized that not enough people were using it, using specific features. Now, as far as how do you decide which ones to pivot and which ones to not, ultimately that does depend on the market that you want to ultimately corner and win. And the other part of that is understanding if maybe the way that the specific feature was built maybe isn't completing or fulfilling the job that the customer hired the product for. How do you figure that out? You have to talk to them. And we will absolutely get into that also in the research section. But it's a great question. And it's not going to be a clear answer for everyone. Some it will be very clear. If people aren't adopting something, if they're not adopting a feature, it's probably because it's not fulfilling a need, or they might not even know about it. You have to really understand, did we do enough effort to make sure that people understand the value of this feature or even like the sub-product? And if you've done the hard work of product marketing and people still aren't using it, then maybe it's not fulfilling the need that you originally thought it was. You might have to go back, redesign it, reiterate on it, and then maybe you talk about how do you pivot this. But it's a very big question. We'll definitely get into jobs to be done. Any good? Okay, cool. Thank you, by the way. Oh yeah, so I never explained this because it's the first time this is happening, but that little like woman emoji, she's like, hey, what's up? That lets me know to pause and answer questions. So thank you. You're gonna see her throughout. Okay, content. Traffic equals content plus distribution. What about distribution? Distribution is fun because it's the one place where startups, especially startups, they completely forget to do. Distribution is really just audience building 101. And I say that like, yeah, that's so easy. It's ultimately figuring out what channels do you need to put your content in. Could be the blogs, articles, et cetera. And it's also ultimately where do you need to be present as a product, as a company? What channels do you need to really be present in? And a lot of people, most businesses, will spend 80% of their time creating the content and then 20% of the time distributing it. But there's a lot of research that says if you actually flip that, 80% of your time should really be spent distributing what you've already built, and then 20% of the time should be spent actually creating it. This is really where the secret formula flips. If you're present in where your customers actually want you to be, the distribution piece is actually not as hard as maybe it is if you were just to build it and hope and pray that they will come. But the reality is, again, it's a very noisy market out there. It's noisy. 75% of blog posts don't get more than 300 views. If that doesn't make you want to ball up and cry, because maybe you've spent $1,000 on some random content writers on Upwork, and knowing that you're never going to get more than 300 views per visit, I mean, that's insane, especially if you have a free trial conversion rate of also something very small, like 5%, 2%. That means that maybe one person will complete a free trial. Still pretty small. That said, just creating the high quality content is already very, very challenging, but there's a secret formula that we will get to later. There's absolutely a way to do this, and it's going to blow your minds because of how simple it is. But then the other piece is actually distributing it. Where do you distribute this? We talked about marketing channels earlier, and there's a lot here. There's, organic search, paid advertising, video, social, the full shebang. You have experienced these in some ways or others, whether you realize them or not. If you are a marketer, you're hyper aware because you're a marketer. You're trained to understand and recognize these things. And if not, maybe you are and maybe not, but there's tons. We have to figure out where we should be spending our distribution time and what's actually going to be effective, what's going to move the needle. Because there's so many channels out there, there's even more that I didn't even list in that giant list, but no matter what channel you come across, no matter how uncomfortable you are with the marketing process, especially if you're a technical founder and you're like, I don't get this, but we're gonna try. So no matter what channel you come across, there's really just three types. There's three types. There's owned, earned, and paid. And for the rest of your company, for the rest of your marketing career, a channel, no matter what it is, if it's new especially, it's really going to fall into one of these three. Or it might be between two, but we'll get into that in just a second. Owned is pretty simple. It's all the channels and content and media that you, your business, your company owns. This includes your website. This includes social media channels that you own. So for me, it's @AsiaMatos. That is my owned Twitter channel. It's mine. I can distribute content through what I own. This would also include your newsletter lists, if you have newsletters. Any channel content that ultimately you control. The second is earned. This is the word of mouth. This is people who write about you, who refer people to you. This is also, if you literally think about it, earned in the literal sense, this is what you've put all of your hard work and effort into that other people have noticed. This includes review sites, etc. And the last one is paid media. This is actually the one that most everyone starts with, and they get very frustrated by because they don't understand why it doesn't work when they want it to. So earlier when I was talking about, yeah, we should do Facebook ads, we should do AdWords, this is primarily what people start with. They start with paid, and they kind of forget about the other two. This is where a lot of people get frustrated, they quit, they're like, marketing doesn't work. But I would argue that if you think about any channel that comes your way, Quora, for example, Quora has decided to do ads. They've released this to the public, I think, within the last year. Immediately, all the founders are like, should we be doing Quora ads? But the question is, well, how much owned media do you have? How much earned? And how much paid do you have? Does it make sense to add more to paid? Or maybe you don't have any paid at all, but it makes sense for your customer. So no matter what channel is thrown at you, I want you to think of these three, because it's really going to fall into one of the three buckets. And based off of your marketing strategy, you will ultimately be able to say, yeah, we're kind of weak on the earned side, or we're kind of weak on the owned side. And you'll be able to diversify from there. Just like a stock portfolio, you're going to diversify your marketing strategy as well. This is how traffic happens. Very, very simple formula. But the work and effort that is involved in this, just for a free trial, it's pretty expensive. It's massive. Again, we're going to cut through the noise and figure out exactly what your customers actually want through a framework we will cover after this. Do we have questions? Oh, cool.
We do, yes. So back to the three owned, earned, paid. How is it imperative that you do all three? If so, how do you manage your time to spend on each of them?
Yeah.
Is it equal? Is it not? What if you don't have one of those three buckets?
If you are an early stage SaaS company, I would say it is not imperative that you do all three of these at once. In fact, I would say you would burn out, something would fizzle, and you wouldn't be able to move the needle in any one direction in the time that you want. You can try all three, and it will be very, very tough, especially if you have a small team. What I highly recommend that people start out with is focused on owned first. Focus on what you own first. And then as you start to get more users, feedback, you get more customers, and you're kind of stretching yourselves in many different markets, which absolutely happens, it's gonna happen, you will begin to understand, we really like playing in this space for these specific people. And that will also dictate what your earned and also paid strategies will be as well. But I definitely recommend starting with owned, because if you think about it, you can really only control what you own first. And then after that, as you start expanding and exploring, you can start exploring what earned means for you and what paid means for you. And seeing, as you diversify there, seeing like what really works. There are some companies that only focus on like two. They don't care about anything that they own. They only focus on paid and earned. And that's legit, because it gives them revenue, if you think about it. If it didn't, I would say, okay, well, we need to question this. We need to ask more questions.
Yeah, one more. As someone who has never done paid, how do you begin and budget paid media for distributing content?
Yeah. How many of you are familiar with the concept of the funnel? You're familiar with the funnel. Awesome. You get people to your website. From there, they convert into a free trial or a demo request. And then from there, you're followed up with either a salesperson or they can just get into the product immediately and start using it. Very, very simple funnel. I'm a big fan of simple funnels until you have to make it complex. But where you start to budget and where you start understanding how do you budget for this, you have to do the reverse numbers. How much traffic do you need to your website to result in a free trial? And the same thing for content. How many times does someone have to visit the blog? How much time passes before someone is able to say, like, yeah, okay, I'm ready, and then they sign up for the free trial? This is actually very complex, especially if you're early stage, because chances are you're not going to be able to invest in a super hardcore analytics platform, but that's okay. Because if you focus on momentum, and we'll absolutely talk about this later, if you focus on momentum, you'll see the free trials rolling in. Now, as far as how do you budget for that, again, it's got to be how much is a free trial or demo worth to you? And if you do the reverse math, how much traffic do you need before someone fills out that demo request or free trial? That will give you your ultimate cost. How much is it cost for you to get one lead? And then from there, you can budget and scale accordingly. I actually find that early stage companies, early stage SaaS, paid is not super sustainable. It helps, don't get me wrong, it definitely helps. You want your content to go far, you want people to see it. But ultimately, if it doesn't mathematically make sense, it might not make sense in the very beginning. That is definitely something that after you build the foundation and after you build the engine, if it's working, then you feel much more comfortable with paid. But definitely my best recommendation. Does that make sense? I see a few nods. It's like, this is scientific. Okay, cool. Okay, we're done with this section. Okay, what about more booked demos? I get this one a lot too. Let's say you're really not a free trial model. You need more booked demos. Did you guys see Morgan Ingram's SDR 101? Did anybody here see that? Okay. The way that Morgan talks about prospecting for the sales process, I actually love, because it fits perfectly into this. If you need more demos, you need more qualified meetings. Very, very simple. Demos booked is, if you break that out, it's sales and it's marketing. It's both. Sales, because ultimately a salesperson has to take that demo and turn that into revenue. Outreach, volume, relevancy. You need someone reaching out to people at a volume that makes sense and is highly, highly relevant. This is basically SDR 101. This is prospecting. And a lot of founders are usually the first people to do it, which I highly, highly recommend and I encourage. And the second part is traffic, which we already know what traffic is. We already know what it takes to get more traffic to the website. And then what if we need both? This happens too. There are some companies that are, they do have a free trial. People can self-serve. They also have a demo model. Which one do you do? Which one do you do first? I always get this question. And if you are very early stage, I highly recommend that you pick one and you focus on it. And the reason being is because if you don't understand what moves the needle for one, it's going to be very hard to turn around and apply it to the other. If you are much later on in the game, so for example, you have a much more established sales team, you have an established marketing team, then going after both could work for you. But it is a matter of really picking and choosing your battles and making sure that the team is aligned. Super early stage, very, very tough to do. Highly recommend just picking one and sticking to that one. But this is just, of course, sorry, what I've seen. But Questions here?
So how do you split sales versus marketing? Like, what is your take on that? Right now you're including demos in this. So how are you designating this is a sales thing, this is a marketing thing? Can you speak a little bit towards that?
Yeah. There is no straight answer, to be honest. This is going to depend on your internal leadership. It's going to depend on your product. It's also going to depend on how people currently interact with you. And I hate to give you the it depends, because that feels like a cop-out, and I'm sorry. But the reality is that I've seen it work in many different ways in many different companies. But I would say, from what I've seen, work really, really well. If you need more demos, marketing and sales should be obviously working together. It's impossible to not. I very much believe in, with a growth team, they should own revenue. They should own net new MRR. This is not all, and this will change over time as you scale and as you grow. But from what I've seen, where you lay the responsibility is really going to depend on your product and really just your internal team. There are some companies that operate only on marketing is only responsible for MQLs. And for some companies that works. Some companies it totally falls apart, because then you have marketers optimizing for MQLs and not revenue. I hate to give a fuzzy answer, but I do believe it's going to depend on who owns what. Welcome back. Okay, this is the juicy, meaty stuff that we're about to get into. This is the step-by-step process. This is definitely why you guys hopefully came, is to learn exactly how I do this for not only my clients, but how I've done this in previous companies. We have the formulas, and if we think about software, free trials, more demos, traffic equals content and distribution, and then of course, if you need more booked demos, you do need to have some kind of sales function plus marketing, of course. But the first step, and this is where everyone groans, but the first step is research. But it's not just any kind of research. This is the step that most new business owners skip, most startups skip, new marketers skip. I have skipped this step many a time and regretted it fatally. And it is the step that I incorporated in my previous company, and I'm currently incorporating now for a lot of new up-and-coming budding startups. But it's research. And if you cannot read the slide, I apologize. Hopefully, I believe you will be getting this after the presentation. Yes, I'm getting some nods. Awesome. So you guys can really dig into this. But the first, there's really 4 kinds of research if you are software. There's market research. So global, total addressable market. How much money could you make in this market? That's the market research. Then it gets down into another level, which is, well, are there other competitors in this research? That's a second, competitive research. The third and the fourth are bolded because they are the pieces that most people will skip. They figure, oh, I'm going to go into this market, I'm going to do some competitive stuff, and yeah, that's enough. But the reality is that when it comes to defining your marketing strategy, you have to do steps number 3 and number 4. That's prospect research, people who have not purchased your product yet, but you want to, and people who did purchase your product, or they signed up if you're still in beta, wanting some people to use it. These are the number 2 things that most startups will skip, and it's to their detriment. They end up wasting a lot of time, energy, trying to figure things out, when in reality, if they started with these, after they do everything else, this is where they will understand, oh, that's where I need to be. And the reason why we do research is because most people will actually tell you, your target market, your target audience will actually tell you how to market to them and how to sell to them. That sounds insane. Why would people tell me how to market and sell to them? There's actually a way to do this without being overly salesy or overly markety and still provide value and get the answers that you need for your product. And the reason also why we do research is because they will actually tell you what channels they hang out in if you ask the right questions. They will tell you where they spend most of their time. They will also tell you what other companies they really enjoy their marketing from. There is a company that I'm working with called Forget the Funnel. If you are an up-and-coming SaaS marketer, I highly recommend forgetthefunnel.com. Definitely go check it out. It's an amazing resource for up-and-coming marketers. But one thing that they very much believe in is obviously the research process. And on every single survey that they send out, they always ask, what are some other companies that you really enjoy using, products that you really enjoy using, and products that you enjoy their branding from? And they get all kinds of answers. But the ones that repeat themselves are really the ones that you should pay attention to. So for example, in Forget the Funnels case, all of the marketers that sign up and complete a survey, they all love intercom. They all love drift. These are the recurring themes. That's very valuable research. Forget the Funnel could go turn around, do a partnership with intercom, and get some of that market share, if you think about it that way. That's why you ask those very simple questions. People will actually tell you who to pay attention to. People will tell you where they hang out. I know that sounds insane, but it's the step that everyone skips. And the products that don't skip this step, they're the ones that build the highly addictive, the very, I need this tool. They're the ones that are able to generate demand. And then, of course, my personal favorite, you get the content ideas and you get the knowledge gaps. People will tell you what they don't understand about your product. People will also tell you content ideas and content pieces that they consume, and also what resonates with them that you produce. This is why we do research. Many people skip it. I think that's a mistake. The last piece is, ultimately, if you have a product or even a service, what is the job that people hire your product for? This is a framework that is known as jobs to be done, JTBD. After this session, if you go look up jobs to be done and the jobs to be done framework, I honestly think it will change your life. Changed mine when I discovered it and I started implementing it. But jobs to be done is a cheat code. And the reason why is because a lot of people will ask questions like, well, were you satisfied with our product on a scale of 0 to 10? Like, would you recommend? But that really doesn't get to the meat and the bones of why people purchased your product or why people bought your service. At the end of the day, people hire products to complete a job. For years, there's a product that I've been using, Trello, Asana, project management tool. For years, I've used tools like that. And for the longest time, I always thought, oh yeah, like I invest in this tool because it gives me some semblance of like, oh yeah, I feel more organized, I feel control. But the real reason why I've hired Trello and Asana, this is not something I would have come up with on my own. It was until going through this process that I was like, oh, that's the real reason. It's actually very emotional. Using a tool like Trello and Asana gives me an emotional sense of control over my day-to-day operations for my business. It's very different than, yeah, okay, I can just like manage some tasks. Very, very different. Your product, your service has a job in your customer's heart that you are fulfilling, and it's your job to uncover that. And through the Jobs to Be Done framework, it's actually very simple. You're not just asking surface-level questions. You're asking people, what were they doing when they were looking for your product? What actions were they taking? What channels were they in when they were looking for your product or your service? How did they go about making this decision? Who did they talk to? What did they talk about? This is all part of Jobs to Be Done framework. And if you do that, if you do Jobs to Be Done enough times with enough people, you'll be able to uncover some very real insights that you wouldn't have been able to otherwise. How many of you actively talk to your customers or your prospects? Raise them proud. Woo! I'm a fan. That's awesome. Congratulations. How many of you ask them why they bought your product? That's awesome. Continue to do that. And don't feel bad if you don't. It's okay. This is why I'm here. If you talk to your customers, if you ask them about their behaviors leading up to the purchase or the sign up, you'll start to understand, this is how I need to start marketing this product. This is how I need to position myself. Maybe the brand strategy isn't anymore, let's just go be a task management solution, but let's teach people that they can actually get control of their lives again. Like, that's a very different marketing strategy, very different positioning. Jobs to Be Done is a cheat code. I highly recommend it to everyone. I will continue to preach about it, obviously, and then, of course, implement it for myself and my customers. But the bottom line is people will tell you how to market to them. They will tell you what they actually enjoy. Even if it's not from you specifically, they'll think of companies that they do love. And that's also where the meat is as well. A lot of people, I think, get very stressed out about creating their marketing strategy, but the reality is that if you talk to prospects and customers, you will absolutely get the answers that you need. But the first step has to actually happen. You have to actually ask them. And you can start now. So someone asked me, there was a question earlier about what tools am I using to understand product and also understand how people are using this, or how people are using their product or their service. I highly recommend tools like Heap, Full Story, and Hotjar. This slide actually gives you the step-by-step process. Install Hotjar, Full Story, and Heap today. You can do that today, totally free, to a certain amount of sessions. For Hotjar, Hotjar is all about heat mapping and understanding how people navigate your website. Run a heat map on your homepage. Run a heat map on your blog homepage. What's going to happen is Hotjar is going to create this heat map, and you're going to start seeing, are people focused on this web page, or is it scattered everywhere, people aren't really focused, which gives you an understanding of you might need to make some website changes. And as Hotjar is running on the website, obviously you'll be able to see that. For Full Story, this is a great in-app tool to leverage. Install it inside of your product, install it inside of your application. And literally pop a bag of popcorn and sit and watch sessions for like an hour, 2 hours. What's gonna happen is you're gonna start seeing your best paying customers, the people who don't churn, they take very specific actions. And then the people who do churn, there's actions that they don't take. There's activities that they don't at all even think about doing. This will clue you into your onboarding strategy and also, obviously, activation. And then lastly, with Heap. So the funnel, we're familiar with the concept of the funnel. A lot of tools out there today, this is very technical, I apologize. A lot of tools don't know how to balance events and page views. So Google Analytics, for example, is a great tool, but it's not necessarily going to always be able to give you the funnel that you need. Highly recommend using a tool like Heap so you understand how many page views do you need to have to turn into a free trial or a demo conversion. This is true for both your website, for every single landing page you have. This gives you an understanding of, ultimately, behavior. And there's a myth that I also just want to make sure that we dispel, and it's that you don't want to bother your customers. I hear this a lot, and as a marketer, I violently disagree with it. You want to talk to your customers, and oftentimes they actually want to hear from you. I think a lot of us think that if we just leave them alone and we don't bother them, that they're going to be fine. But I think the other thing, too, is that you're building a relationship, and most people are very, very happy to help you. So I want to make sure that you're not afraid to actually talk to them. OK, so we've started the research process. We've booked at least 7 meetings with our prospects and customers. We've installed a few tools to understand our website behavior because, again, we operate on the digital plane. People don't come to our houses and knock on our doors wanting to buy software.
We did have a few questions.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Back to when you're asking those interviews, is there a template that you start with, right? You had those lists there.
Yes.
Then do you customize? And then if so, how long are those interviews and how many are you doing?
Yes. Ooh, I love this. Okay. 3 questions. Okay. The first, are there interview questions that I use? Yes. There's a resource that hopefully maybe we can send out after this. If you go to userlist.io, Userlist is an up-and-coming startup. They're actually all over the world, but they actually published their exact interview process, and they actually also published their questions that you can go and access. I definitely took that list of questions, and I've iterated on them over time, because some of them aren't going to be as applicable to you. But ultimately, what you're looking at is, and especially if you do the research on jobs to be done, you'll come up with a list of questions, and there will absolutely be recurring ones. The ones that you ask are going to really ultimately depend on the goal. Do you want to understand what content you need to be creating? Do you want to understand what kind of product you should be building? Those are going to ultimately dictate the questions that you ask. I will say, though, that I generally do a mix where I'll ask product-specific questions and content and channel and behavior-related questions. Typically, they are 30 minutes long. I have found, though, that that's not enough time. And if you go through the trouble of booking the meeting, it should at least be 45 minutes. Maybe an hour is too extra. But I highly recommend like the 30 to 45-minute range. And I believe that was all of those, correct? Did I miss one? I might have.
I think that's right.
OK, cool.
Another one that came in at the Bitly SSU questions, if you're interested and you walked in, just FYI, is when is the research done and you actually market? Say when you're building a website or when you're building a product, when do you know you've done enough to put an actual product out? Like you're starting, you've done all this. How do you say you're done?
Yeah, it's kind of the question of like when are you comfortable with your MVP? And then at the same exact time, it's also to answer the research question, it's never done. Your research is never done. This is the life of the marketer. It never ends. You are constantly talking to your customers and your prospects, and you're also constantly talking to them at every stage that they're in, whether they are prospects or actual users. Now, when do you actually make decisions? And this is kind of like I hate to give you the math, like statistical relevance answer. I would say if you conduct anywhere from 10 to 15 interviews and you hear the same thing over and over and over again, that should be a clue to maybe change something. And then as you continue the process, you will continue to get feedback from anyone who will give it to you. For me, I think the most important part is, and someone else asked this question earlier, it's all about the market and the customer that you ultimately want to serve as a company. Because you're going to get feedback from customers and from users that ultimately aren't really in your target market. They're not really in the market that you actually want to serve. You really want to focus on the people that you do want to serve. If you don't have enough customers, that might be really tough. You're not really sure where to go. Definitely recommend actually getting people in first, and then deciding to listen to some groups and maybe not others necessarily. The point is to prioritize for the audience that you actually want to do business with. And there you will absolutely have customers that you're just love that they're customers, don't necessarily want to serve them. You also have customers that you're like, yes, we love these people. That is really where you want to be. Not always. And as you hit scale, you'll start serving many more different types of people. But ultimately, I think that's really where the answer is going to come. Who do you really want to do business with? Cool. Okay. These formulas that we had earlier. After research, this was kind of like a little bit in the first section, but it's all about the analysis. Now we have to actually take everything that we've heard and put some kind of qualitative and quantitative data behind it. Whenever we say marketers need to be data-driven, what we're really saying is, based off of what we're hearing from customers, this is maybe what we need to actually implement from a marketing strategic perspective and then also from a product perspective. You're really looking at two things in the early stage. What is the current state of your acquisition funnel? And then the second piece, of course, is what are the best prospect and customer behaviors? Earlier when I said after you install Full Story, maybe you're using a tool like Baremetrics, and you're starting to watch these in-app sessions for your product, you want to understand what are the best prospect and customer behaviors. We use this for activation and, of course, also acquisition. A great example is Rindle. One of the easiest ways to grow is really to focus on taking your free trial conversion rate and improving that. So after people convert into your free trial, the thing that hurts every founder and makes them sad, and it makes me sad too, is churn. Churn sucks. One of the easiest ways to fix that is by doing steps number 1 and 2, just doing the sheer analysis. Rindle is a great example. So Rindle is one of my clients, and I love working with them. But something that we realized was we did all this work, doing all this research, interviewed all these customers. They told us exactly what channels they hang out in. They told us exactly what content they're interested in. So we said, okay, we're going to go and we're going to make that. We're going to implement it, and we're going to go. After that, though, we got all this traffic. We got all these free trials. We killed our free trial goal for the month. But then most of them churned. A number that we were like, holy crap, this kind of sucks a lot. And we realized that we needed to go back and do some extra work. And part of that process of watching the full story sessions of people using your product and what those best behaviors are, that's exactly what we did. We literally sat and for 1 to 2 hours watched hundreds of sessions. And we were able to notice some patterns. And the patterns were the customers that become better paying customers are the ones who do these 4 steps. They create their own boards. Sorry, I should give context. Rindle is a tool like a Trello or an Asana. They are a project management tool. People create their own boards. They use a feature called automations. They invite at least 5 other people. This was a key one. If they didn't invite 5 other people, they were likely to churn out of the free trial. And they also create their own workflows through lists, meaning if you sign up for Rindle, you'll get a bunch of demo boards. The people who became customers don't use those demo boards. That was a behavior that we recognized. This is a way that we can actually change the onboarding process to keep more free trial users to grow. Because if you can knock churn out the window, then you have more revenue in your pocket, and that's awesome. But we also understand now, based off of this, what content we need to create. This tells us ultimately, oh, we probably should talk more about automations. That's a key part of growth for this specific product. And this is not going to look the same for everyone, but if you have a SaaS product, you can start understanding this today. This is something you can do right now for free. Full story is free, I think, up to a certain amount. So why is this important to know? And this is also a question that I get, because it's like, well, yeah, like this is all like activation, that's cool. But what does this have to do with acquisition? If you understand what your best paying customers are doing, what they're looking at, how they're involved with your process, and your overall product, you'll be able to say, okay, we need to be able to produce these things for those people, for that audience. After a few dozen different interviews with our best paying customers, we realized that there really wasn't a whole lot of content automations. They stumbled upon it. What if we introduced content about automations that got people inside of automations as fast as possible and mitigated that churn risk? Instant growth, right there. I don't know if it's going to work, but it's something that we need to test and we need to try. And that's only something we could have figured out if we had done the analysis and done the research. That's why it's so important that we do this. Questions here?
Yeah, just one.
Okay.
What are some other examples of the content that you created from the Rindle example?
Yes. We had, there were a few different interviews that we did. And Rindle really makes a ton of sense for companies that have tons of contractors and freelancers, or they're growing really fast, and they don't necessarily want to pay for like a Trello or an Asana per user. Rindle's a flat monthly fee. It's one of the most competitive things about Rindle. One of the interviews that we did, few of them actually, some people were saying, I don't really read content necessarily, but they listen. They listen to tons of podcasts. And at the time, we were kind of like, okay, yeah. But then we kept hearing it, and we kept hearing it. No, we don't really read a bunch of stuff. I don't really read content, but I do listen to it. I do listen to podcasts. I listen to podcasts about leadership. I listen to podcasts about productivity. I listen to podcasts about my industry, because a lot of these companies service specific industries. And after a series of these interviews, co-founders Brian and Tom were like, and this was something that was kind of growing. You really feel it, I think. But they were like, we should start a podcast. And it was like, yes, congratulations. Yes, let's do that. Let's start a podcast. Don't know if it's going to work, but we've been hearing it over and over and over again from our customers that's the content that they consume. We're actually launching a podcast next week, which feels really good. And the content itself will evolve and change over time as we get feedback. But this is the relationship that you're creating. This is ultimately you're taking real, actual customer feedback that you've been hearing over and over again, and you're implementing it. So that was something that's going to help fuel the content process for sure. There's another example, and this is a quick one, but we also learned from everyone that they don't really know what the best workflow is for them. There's lots of people who feel very overwhelmed by the project management process. They don't really know like what to implement. So we've decided to focus our content on, okay, we need to teach people. To us, it's basic. To us, we already know it because we're in the product, obviously. But to all of our customers, it wasn't. So that is also how we focus the content strategy specifically for acquisition.
Yeah, I have one more. Is
Yes.
A/B testing still relevant, or is it too binary, not nuanced enough to be useful?
Yeah. I am not a CRO expert, so I'm sorry to disappoint you. But I know a lot of people who are. There's two people I want to introduce you to. I guess it's technically a company. First, ConversionXL. It's conversionxl.com. They, to me, are the actual CRO experts in this space. And everything that PEP produces, the courses that they offer, I highly recommend them. I consider them to be the experts on conversion rate optimization, which is really what A/B testing is. And then the second person I want to make sure that you know about, her name is Talia, Talia Wolf. She's the second person I want you to know about. Talia is amazing. She's also a CRO expert. I'm sure she has tons and tons and tons of thought leadership on that. My personal opinion is that it is extremely relevant, especially on landing pages. It's extremely relevant on your overall website. When you start doing that is when you get traffic. If you don't have traffic to your website, no amount of A/B testing for you is going to be illustrative or insightful because you don't have traffic. That said, I find that we end up doing a lot more CRO and A/B testing after we've done the hard work of figuring out what attracts people first and attracts the right people. So hopefully that's okay, cool. Okay, step 3, your product's North Star. This is a concept from one of my favorite people, Sean Ellis of growthhackers.com. And the North Star metric, and this is where we start pulling together all the insights that we've learned from digging into our product, understanding our users, understanding what they care about, and then also applying that straight to actual revenue and the ultimate KPI that we are going to go after. Not every company is going to have a North Star metric. And what is that? Basically, a North Star metric is, it could be MRR. This is the one number that your entire company is going to fight for. They're all going to fight for MRR. It could be pure revenue, could be that. For some companies, it could be free trials or demos. Your whole entire company is pulsing just for free trials. That's their only KPI. It's the only thing that they care about. Focusing your entire company on some core KPI, that's your North Star. For some companies, though, it can be actual activity. And if you are using a tool like Hotjar or FullStory and you are understanding your product activity in-app, this is also what's going to give you the big clue. For Rindle, it was number of automations. If a customer or a free trial conversion used a bunch of automations, they were very likely to become a paying customer, and that's indicative of growth. For a company like Airbnb, we've all heard of Airbnb, their North Star metric is number of nights booked. Notice that it is not just pure MRR. If you have a North Star that is pure MRR, you're not doing anything wrong. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. It's okay to have your North Star metric be MRR. But after doing all this research, it will ultimately tell you, do you have a North Star metric that isn't? Could you ultimately align your business around some specific thing? And if you're super early stage, this is going to be really hard, and it's okay if you don't have an answer. As you grow and as you expand, you get more users, you get a lot more people under your belt. That's when you start to understand, these are the specific actions people have to take inside of my application in order to become a customer. And you can align your entire business around that. At my previous company, it wasn't actually this, but it could have been number of integrations. We could have aligned the entire organization around maximizing the number of integrations someone made, because that's ultimately growth. So Breather is not a client of mine, but it'd be kind of cool if they were. But Breather, for them, it was number of booked hours. And this is one of my favorite conversations that he had. He said, I remember sitting in a bar on December 26th over a beer. And mind you, he was strapped, totally out of cash. He didn't have a whole lot of runway left. He was freaking out. And he said he was with another CEO who was giving him advice. And he said, just pick a number and grow at 8% a week. Really? But then how do I actually grow the number, I asked. He said, you'll figure it out. So there's power in picking one North Star metric. A lot of companies will try to measure how much traffic are we getting, what's our conversion rate, how many booked meetings do we have, blah, blah, blah. But if you really just have one that aligns your entire product to your marketing and your sales strategy, you'll find that you're able to move the needle in one direction. All right, the fun part, actually defining this. Through research, through actually talking to customers, and also through analyzing your product, you will be able to understand who you want to target, who you really want to target, why you want to build a relationship in the first place, what about you makes your company and your brand special, where you want to target them, how you actually want to do it, and after that, the specific action items that you're going to implement after this. This is your one-page marketing strategy right here. If you can take every single one of these bullet points and write a little paragraph about every single one with clarity, this is ultimately your marketing strategy. This is it. After you've done all this work, you're able to come back to this and you say, I know exactly who I want to target. It's okay if it's not perfect. I know why I want to target them. I know where. I know how I want to do this. And now I need to actually define what are the specific action items after this. This is how you do this. All right, so I would be remiss if I didn't say, here's what you should be looking for. Here maybe are kind of the red flags. Here's what you should be looking for as you're building this out and writing this down. Maybe that you might want to consider, the cautionary tales, if you will, the yellow cards. If you've got conflicting strategies, So a great example is we're going to incentivize. We know that we need to invest in content marketing and organic growth, but we're going to turn around and hire a PPC firm or a paid media firm. That's an example of a conflicting strategy. So as you're building out the strategy, if you notice some of those things, and you do have to take a step back and ask yourself, are these things conflicting each other? Maybe you've incentivized sales to focus on book demos, but you've incentivized marketing instead to focus on something completely different. It could be conflicting. It's impossible to say without actually looking at it, but this is the yellow flag that you're looking for. Not a hard, you're out of the game. It's okay, you just be aware. The next big thing, and this is another yellow flag, you don't have enough resources to move the needle in any one direction. I see this constantly. A lot of early stage startups, they want to split and splinter themselves into many different directions, but the reality is that it's too soon. And maybe they don't need to right now. Maybe it's okay to just focus and niche on just one specific person, one specific target audience, and see if you can move the needle in one direction just with that one person. And if you can't, then you know that maybe that wasn't the right customer. Too many say, oh, we need to target these people and these people and these people. And they try to do it all way too soon, way too fast. And they end up getting nowhere, and it's frustrating. So this is a yellow flag. And the last thing is nothing really adds up. So let's say you've done your conversions, you've looked at how much traffic you need for a free trial, and you've done the reverse math, and you find out, crap, I need 1 million visits in a month. That's an example of something not adding up. That means that you might need to go back and say, okay, where can I actually move the needle sensibly? What's realistic? And let's just pick one. There are a few examples of this where if you do the reverse math and you say, oh my gosh, I have to go and make all these free trials just to meet my number, something might be amiss. This is another yellow flag. And then the red cards. So this is all right, you're out of the game. You need MRR yesterday. You need revenue yesterday. If you're going through this process because you're trying to figure out what your marketing strategy is going to be, and you're desperate for revenue right now, I would actually argue that maybe what you have is a sales problem. You have a sales challenge. You need to focus on selling more. This is not always the case. Sometimes it is you might want to actually invest in a marketing strategy that's pretty sustainable. But sometimes, and I get this a lot from early stage companies, they're like, well, we need revenue today. It's like, well, go sell. It's going to be way faster. Do a lot more selling. So if you're doing the strategy and you're doing it under the umbrella of we need revenue right this very second, I would say, okay, pause, hold your horses. Maybe do more selling first, because that'll be way faster for you. You don't have any clear action items. If you go through this entire process, you fill out the one-page marketing strategy, and you're not able to define any specific tactical action items. I don't know what to do next. You might have to go back to your research and go back to everything that you've taken a look at and take a look at it again. You should be able to define action items out of your strategy. It's probably not a great strategy if you're not able to define action items. So I just want to make that very, very clear. And the last thing is you couldn't get any customers on the phone. If you built your marketing strategy and you didn't talk to a single person, you're already out. You're out of the game. You're not coming back to the next one. I fundamentally believe in the power of talking to your customers. It's going to get you way further than not, and faster too. So, like I said, if you can't even get anyone on the phone, then you haven't started.
Okay, real quick.
Sorry.
So sales and marketing teams often clash and point fingers. Should sales create their own sales pitch decks, or should marketing create it for sales to ensure consistency?
This is so controversial, and I love it. I come from the world of, I've seen both. I've seen both happen. I very much believe that if you're going through this process, you're not doing it alone, meaning some representative from the sales team is going through this process with you, because it's going to be a lot. Selling to a salesperson is it's the most impossible thing. They already know all the tricks, right? So if you build this marketing strategy, or if you build the pitch decks and build all the content, you come back to them later and you're like, hey, salesperson, use this. They're going to be like, no, I'm not using your stuff. I already got stuff. That said, I firmly believe in going through this process together. If you do have a developed sales and marketing team, If you do it together, it's going to be, it's just going to go way smoother than you trying to force something on someone. My personal opinion is I do believe marketing should be creating the pitch decks. I do believe it should be with sales. I don't think that it can happen in isolation. Again, you're going to give that content to the salesperson, and they're going to turn around and be like, I'm not going to use that because I wasn't a part of it. Conversely, sales should also probably not do it by themselves. They need that. This is why they need marketing, and this is why it's a good relationship, or it should be if you're working on it, which you should. But I do believe it should be done together. And ultimately, marketing should kind of lead the charge. But also with the guys of sales. Sales knows what they need to say to close. I would trust that too. Cool. All right, execution. This is the part that scares everyone. No, I'm kidding. It really shouldn't. It's okay if it's not perfect. It's fine if it's not perfect in the beginning. The point is to just do it. Execute on it. Commit to a plan. It's okay if it's not a year out. It's okay. If it's the next 3 months, these are the specific things I'm going to execute on. Oh, wow, everyone has said that they listen to content. They don't read it. Okay, let's start thinking about how we could implement a strategy around content for podcasts. Okay, now let's build it and do it. If you commit to the plan, if you commit to the strategy, set deadlines. And it's okay if it's not, like 6 months out. The reality is that your business is going to change so fast, because that's the way that startups go. It's going to change so fast that by the time that you get to this step, it will have been different already. You will have had way more users, way more research, way more knowledge, and you can continue to iterate and get feedback from this. But the point is that you start. You can't not start. Too many founders, especially, I think, freeze. For marketers, naturally, we want to make sure that everything is perfect and buttoned up. There is a point to where you don't have to make sure it's absolutely perfect, but you do have to make sure it's quality and that it is going to resonate with your audience. And if you go through all the steps, even though you probably were bored to tears by research, you'll have the answer here, and you'll be able to execute on it. Create a plan, and then do it. Just do it. It's going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to be scared, but just do it. Don't worry about it being perfect. If you just execute on it, you'll be fine. The goal is for you to get iterative feedback. Any questions here?
Yes, so can Landing Lion, Hotjar, Full Story, Heap all integrate with Squarespace without overloading your research-oriented testing website? So if you get going, will it overload or no?
That sounds like a implementation question. Try it, see what happens, just do it. I want to say no, in all honesty. I'm not sure why all those things would compete. Every single one of those tools has a very specific use case. It's ultimately how you apply it, but no, it's not going to crash your site or anything. At least I hope it doesn't, but. All right, step 6, constant iteration and feedback. If you've executed, which I really hope by now you haven't been too afraid to, especially after you do all this research, the research should feel liberating. That's really what it should be. You're you're demystifying all of this. You're removing the doubt, the fear, FUD, basically. You're removing all of that. Now you can actually feel a little bit more comfortable in what you're about to invest in. How many of you have invested in AdWords not having done all the previous steps and then just went straight to AdWords and then didn't get any results? Too many people, I including actually myself. That said, this last step is the feedback. It's more than just results. Sometimes early stage, the feedback is really the most important part. Understanding how are people reacting? How is your target market actually reacting to this? How are your customers reacting to this? That feedback loop is going to happen. We had the earlier question about when does research stop? Never. It never stops. You continue to do this whether you're 5 employees, whether you're 150 employees. It still continues to happen. And as you expand and grow into new markets, because at some point you'll target one specific audience, and over time you'll start targeting many different audiences. All of these steps still have to happen for you to define that strategy. Prioritizing momentum. This is one of my favorite ones, especially if you're early stage. If you prioritize momentum, meaning you're consistently executing, you will see results from it. There are some that are going to be much more intense than others. And then there are some that are not going to give you the return that you're looking for. But if you prioritize the momentum, you will absolutely see the needle move. And that's ultimately the goal. It's like trying to make sure that if you were to throw a stone in a pond of water, like looking at the ripples, how hard can you throw that stone? How many waves can you make? That's really what you're looking at in the early days. And then acknowledge the lag. So from a metrics perspective, the activities that you do today aren't necessarily going to give you revenue instantly. It's not realistic, unless you're in sales. And then it is realistic. But from a marketing perspective, acknowledge the lag. The activities that you execute on today, 30 days from now, 45 days from now, 60 days from now, that's when you start to see the return. If you acknowledge that lag in time, it's going to take time to build an audience. It's going to take time to make waves. If you acknowledge that, that's ultimately what you're going to be able to say, like, oh, these were the activities that we did. That's ultimately what worked. So there is a little bit of a lag in SaaS, and it's important to acknowledge that. Questions here?
Can you talk a little bit about isolating results? Example, how do we know that the podcast led to demos, or that the Medium article or the landing page with the bigger CTA button?
Yeah.
A little about that.
Okay, so this is an attribution question. And when you're early on, the reality is that you're not going to be able to invest in like a big, beefy attribution modeling tool, and that's okay. The other piece is, if you think about your owned, earned, and paid media strategies, you're also ultimately able to separate out how each of those pieces play. And earlier I said, you're really focusing on one first. You're focusing on one first, and you're nailing that one. You know it works, because you can see the results. You can see the needle move, because you're focusing on momentum, and you're also focusing on execution based off of very good research. After you get really comfortable with that, you'll start adding on different layers. And in the early days, I'm not going to lie, it's going to be really, really tough to see if someone saw a Facebook ad, did that ultimately result in a demo. It is really hard to see that, and it's not always perfect. The point, though, is that if you have a really good strategy and if you have a really good analytics tool, it doesn't have to be Heap, but even Google Analytics will do this. You can see what the channels are that contribute to growth. But it is important to recognize a lag, and you might have to change Google Analytics, specifically the platform, to acknowledge that lag. Right now, I think it's like within 30 minutes, someone has to request a demo for it to be attributed to some source. You can change that. It's ultimately going to be up to you guys and how you're currently tracking. As you get later stage, as you become much more involved, or evolved, I should say, and you're able to actually invest in the tools, you will be able to see what content ultimately resulted in a demo in the long term. Remember, there's a lag, so you're probably going to have to look in a window within the last 45 to 60 days, potentially. That's ultimately what's going to tell you what blog post did people have to look at to ultimately request the demo or the free trial, and then do more of that. Hopefully that answered the question. Cool. All right. Top 2 marketing strategies. And we've got 4 slides, and then we're done. And we will take live questions. These are the top 2. This is what I've seen early stage SaaS over and over and over again. These formulas, ultimately, there's really 2 that can help you get there. The first is account-based marketing. And how many of you guys have heard of account-based marketing? Pretty much everyone in the room. Awesome. I have to give a shout out to ABM, because it actually is a shortcut if you have a very high ACV. ACV meaning average contract value. If you are more than, let's say, $15K a year, for every single customer is at least that, ABM actually might be a very strong play for you. This is marketing and sales coming together on a target list of accounts that you want to win. And ultimately, you pull together the campaigns that you need to close those deals. It's the one-to-one marketing model, one-to-one. Market our brand to this one company. What do we need to say? What meetings do we need to have? What content do we need to create to win this one organization? You might have a few different tiers. You might have 100 customers or 100 accounts. But that's one of the fastest ways to acquisition. If there's a list here, if you have a very defined market, ABM could be for you. For example, you sell turbines. Who buys turbines? Maybe like 10 companies in the whole planet. I don't actually know. But you have a very defined market. very small number of accounts who can reasonably buy your product, ABM is probably for you. There's actually a full answer here. I answer this question in extreme detail on Quora. There's a link to this, but this is the high level. You can afford an amazing data tool. You have a very high ACV, very, very high ACV, in the tens of thousands, I would say. You don't have a free trial model, and you do mostly custom implementations. So for Hull's a great example, actually. We weren't full ABM, but there was a part of our acquisition strategy that was. The second, questions here? Okay, the second, demand gen. And this is really where my experience really, truly is. And I know everyone's like, demand generation, what is that? What did you just say? Demand generation is the one-to-many strategy. This is not the one-to-one, this is the one-to-many. This is building an audience. This is you're creating things that people love, and they love hearing from you, they love your marketing, they love everything that you do. Not everything that you do, but you're starting to build an audience around what you're producing. This could include, and this is I think where the confusion is. A lot of people think content marketing is like this isolated thing. Content marketing, inbound, all of those pieces that come together, it's part of demand generation. Think of demand generation as the big umbrella. And out of that can fall any of these things. It could be brand building, it could be product marketing, it could be personal brand building. There are many CEOs who have a personal brand in addition to their actual brand. Partnerships, PR, it could be any of these things. But if you do the research, demand gen becomes much more clear. And you're not spinning your wheels on everything, you're really focused. But demand gen is my personal favorite. But I had to give a shout out, of course, to ABM, because if you have a high ACV, doing demand gen might take too long. Might just be better just to go after a target list of accounts and see growth that way. Any questions here? All right. If there's anything that you take away from me today, it's this. The only rule as a marketer and a founder that you have to follow is give your people what they want. If you give people what they want and what they're looking for, you can win them as a market. And the marketing process becomes way more fun. You're not like scratching the dirt trying to find leads or anything like that. You've actually built a relationship, you've built an audience, and you've also probably built a product that people are crazy about. That's the ultimate goal. Give people what they want. It's the only rule that you have to follow as a marketer. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We do have one. So I had a question earlier that I was saving to the end. Can you just give us a rundown of your favorite tools thus far? I know you've mentioned a bunch, but is there any additional tools that we need to know about? And then after that, we'll take a few more from the audience if you guys do have. We have a little bit of time.
Yeah.
So speak to that first.
Other tools that I do love. Oh, man, there's so many. There's so many. I'm really all about that Baremetrics life right now. Baremetrics is it's like a chart mogul, a reporting tool for your SaaS product. I also know the founder, Josh Pigford. And this is a great example of really good marketing. He creates relationships with people. They obviously fall in love with him and his brand, and then they're like, yeah, I'll give Baremetrics a try. Exactly what happened to me. I'm using it in 2 of my clients. I actually didn't put the tool there, but now that I am using it, I love it. It's an amazing experience. Even if you have no need to use that tool ever in a million years, definitely go check it out. And also check out their marketing strategy, because I'm also a very big fan of how they're marketing. They have a few different content pieces, but the first is the Founder's Journey. It's actually a podcast, because they did the research. Founders don't really read articles, but they do listen to a lot of podcasts about growth. And then the second piece is they actually have this open source, I think it's, I'm not gonna remember the name, but it's like, you can see the metrics of other SaaS companies, which to me is brilliant. It's like removing the curtain and like demystifying the SaaS process. It's pretty cool. Check it out. Baremetrics is one. ConvertKit just recently rebranded as a company called Seva. I don't think I'm saying that right. But they were a ConvertKit, and if you look up ConvertKit, it's just literally ConvertKit. It will pop up. One of my favorite tools right now. I think that they did an amazing job of not only building a product that fills my exact need as an email marketer, but also their actual content marketing is pretty amazing. which I'm a pretty big fan of. But those are two off the top of my head. If I think of more, I'll definitely, obviously, like, oh yeah, but those are the first two.
Great. Yeah, one more.
Yeah.
At what point of growth should a new startup add their first marketing employee?
Ooh, okay. I agree. That is a very interesting question. It's another cop-out answer, but I do believe it depends. Can you afford one is the first question. Do you have the capital? If they're experienced, they're not cheap. Be prepared for that. That said, it's tough. I do believe it depends on like what operating capital you actually have. If you have at least a year of runway, might be time to think about it. I do believe it depends on your funding situation. I do believe it just depends on your product. Some companies, especially more specifically developer-focused ones, I actually find that developer-focused companies don't need to invest in marketing as soon as others, which is very interesting. But that's maybe just one slice that I could possibly tell you. I think the answer is really tough. But be prepared to shell out the good dollars if you want someone good.
I do have one more, and then we'll take some audience questions. We got two there.
Oh, sure.
How valuable are case studies to earning your first paying customers?
I believe that if you've gone through the process of selling your product, and if you've gone through the process of selling something, and you've closed that deal, you will get all of the objections up front. And those objections, if they sound like, oh, well, they can't understand like how your product fits in, they don't really understand like the story that your product tells, case studies will probably be a game changer for you. Until you go through the process of selling and closing something, it is going to be tough to say. That said, case studies should kind of be the bare minimum from a marketing perspective. If you don't have case studies, it's fine. Strongly consider implementing them as soon as possible, even if the people that you're interviewing isn't paying yet. And just purely because people want to know and trust that what you're doing is solving some kind of business problem, and also that you're credible and that you're legit. For me, one of the number one red flags, for me specifically as a marketer, so take that with a grain of salt, but as a marketer, if a company doesn't have case studies, I'm typically like, I don't know how invested they are in this. They might not be that serious, so might be worth noting. But the sales process should ultimately tell you how important are they to you today.
Oh, okay. You mentioned Revio.
Yes.
What about other products around marketing like Box or the various clouds in Salesforce? What do you think about those as tools?
In terms of prioritizing revenue or, oh, what do I think of those as tools? I'm sorry.
Yeah, as far as helping the whole process.
Yeah. Helping the whole process. They're excellent tools. From a growth perspective, they have a very interesting use case because I would actually bet money that their number one growth metric was not MRR, it wasn't revenue. I bet it was signups. They prioritized as many people signing up as possible, which I think is actually very brilliant. They have a product that scales very fast, which is awesome. Overall, I think it's a great product. I'm not really sure what the question was, but good stuff, yeah. Oh, she's coming.
Thanks, JC. So let's talk about the pivot for a second.
Yes.
Because pivots happen sometimes early, sometimes late in the game. And you may already have a lot of assets. You've created the case studies, the blog posts, the content. And now you've pivoted your platform and you're going after an entirely new audience. How can you repurpose what you've already created and put out there to now go after a different segment?
Yeah. I've actually lived through two pivots for two different platforms. One at my previous company. In the beginning days, we were very focused on purely marketing, like we're selling to marketers. And then over time, we pivoted way much more towards more technical audiences, like engineers and product and growth. And there's actually a company that I'm going through this exact process with right now. They focused primarily on product managers, and they've pivoted to focus on support managers. There's a very, very, very strong chance that the content that you've already produced can actually be reworked to fit the new audience. I find this is less likely if the audience that you were going after is just so fundamentally different. So a lot of stuff you might actually have to either totally can, or you can really only take specific segments from it. I've seen both happen, and from what we've experienced in both cases, you do have to ultimately sit down and audit, which is no one likes auditing. But if you want to save that investment, because you put money, time, effort into it, blood, sweat, tears, and ultimately someone does have to audit and really decide, especially with the new marketing strategy for the new, ultimately, product strategy, how much are you able to keep and how much you're able to ultimately say, you know what, this was awesome, but we have to lay this puppy to bed. After going through that process, you will be able to see what do you keep, what don't you. Case study-wise, I actually find that most people, you can actually keep the case study if the new buyer has a similar pain point, but 9 times out of 10, they might not be. You could revisit that and get a new case study. If it's possible, it's not always going to be possible for you. But ultimately, you would need to focus on the new case study for the new product strategy and ultimately marketing strategy. So it's definitely a tough call, but hopefully that answers the question.
So kind of a follow-up to that original marketing question about hiring marketing. What about outsourcing the marketing?
Yeah. So I'm naturally biased because I'm typically the outsourced marketer. I definitely believe there's a fit for outsourcing the marketing if you're bootstrapped and or if you know that you don't have a ton of capital today, like you might not have a ton of runway today, but you also know that something needs to move the needle in terms of implementing the marketing strategy and implementing even some of the execution and tactics. I don't recommend outsourcing everything, purely because I firmly believe that the founder has to be a part of the process. I don't work with a single SaaS company where the founder is not involved in the process of marketing and selling. And the reason why is because no outsourced person is ever going to be able to carry your vision to market. They're not going to know it. If you don't have a relationship, they're not going to understand it. That said, I believe it absolutely can work, and obviously it does, which is exactly what I'm doing. And it's purely for companies that can't afford a CMO today. They can't afford a full-time marketer, but they know that they need to do something, and they don't have a whole lot of time, so that's what they invest in. I think it's definitely a case-by-case basis and what you're comfortable with. On the other hand, they're not a full-time employee. You can't tell them what to do. They're typically consultants, and they're experienced. They know what they're doing. So I would say if you're comfortable with so the founders that I typically work with, they're 100% comfortable with not having to figure it out on their own. They're like, I'm cool not figuring marketing out. I would so much rather trust that we work together on this and it's a relationship. So if that's what you're comfortable with, I would say go for it. If you're not comfortable with that, maybe it's not for you, and maybe you need to wait until you're able to actually hire someone. But ultimately, I think it's really about your personal preference. The founders that I work with, they're invested in obviously their product, but then also their relationship side as well. And they also trust, which is a huge piece of that. If that doesn't sound like you, hiring a contractor might not be a thing.
Yeah, right here in the back.
Yes.
Ashia, first of all, excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a slightly different question. We are trying to develop a product for which there is not a market yet very well established. It's an advanced software for oil upstream operation, and they don't have a software. We are trying to build it for them.
Yeah.
So I do have a company that we are working with, a major oil corporation. My idea is how, classical demand generation process might not work. We have to excite. Of course, I'm engaging in the conferences in the right places and all that, but how can we give a comfort, not that market generation yet, but how can you give a comfort that a newer approach to this sort of operations can be beneficial?
Yeah.
Anything on that?
Yeah. So it's kind of like you really do want to test like product market fit. How do you comfortably test product market fit? Yeah. This is actually where I'm a huge believer, still in research, but more specifically, even if they're not users, more specifically talking to companies that look exactly like the ones that you're currently working with. And if you have an understanding from a qualification perspective of who would be a good fit in that market, definitely recommend either going out and interviewing them yourself, talking to them and understanding and getting a feel for even what the sales process would be like, because if you decide to go all in on it, you're going to ultimately be selling it. The second thing is I wouldn't be afraid to lean on industry, I don't want to call them experts, but in industry research, people who know that market like the back of their hand, even if they're not the best user or even the best customer. So for example, Topo, for example, if you know Craig Rosenberg, he's deep into SaaS and more specifically like just analyst research. You could leverage people like that in that industry. But ultimately, you're never going to know product market fit until you just do it. You're not going to know until you sell it and until people start using it and telling you no. You're going to get a lot of that, obviously. Handling those objections. So that's really when you're going to understand. The number one litmus test, because I do have a client that's in this process now. They're not ready to charge, but they're going to. Yeah. The number one litmus test is just charging. Just charge. See who churns and why. And if they don't, if you can save the account, then you know you have something, because obviously they're solving a pain. Your product is solving a business pain or just a deep pain that they have, period. That's really how you know. Just got to do it. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared.
Hi.
Hi.
It doesn't sound like it's on when you're holding it. So you talked about the importance of sales and marketing working together, and have been in marketing long enough to realize oftentimes we're viewed as support or assistance.
Sales enablement.
So my question is more around feedback, but from your customer perspective. We do a fantastic job getting everybody through the funnel, making the sale, and then we have these QBRs where we have all this feedback, and there's highlights on what was great and then what can we do better. But I feel as if there's no maintenance to where that feedback goes after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
So my question to you is, since you're so well-rounded and you've had all these experiences, is there a particular tool that would benefit our customers to where they could share with us? Because I find on the marketing side, like we really want to hear from them, but there's that fine line, but going back to your sales team and how you're approaching them and saying, we don't really have the feedback, but we need it, A, to get more customers, and B, satisfy them and continue to reward them for their loyalty and being with us. So is there an app or something that you would recommend? Because these customers, large distributors, value-added resellers, we know that their time is precious. So any recommendations?
It's basically, yes. It's kind of like the feedback loop might not be a perfect loop. It might kind of be like a squiggle. But you still ultimately want to get it. And then at the same exact time, as marketers, you're kind of like, well, we're running all these campaigns and we're doing all these things. How do we get feedback directly and not have to depend on someone else to tell us, because the teams might not be aligned or whatever. There might be a whole extra thing. But there are tools that you can absolutely leverage. Hotjar is actually one of them. You're basically looking at on-the-spot and on-demand feedback. And Hotjar is something that can do that. And for example, this is actually an opportunity that a lot of marketers don't take. Whenever someone fills out a form to get access to something that you offer, on the landing page, the thank you page, most people waste that page. They just are like, yeah, thank you, bye. But you can actually install a tool like a Hotjar and ask questions on that thank you page and get feedback instantaneously right there. Your thank you page, if you have a form set up or what have you, that is actually a huge opportunity to get immediate feedback. Same thing for if you host webinars, which I think is an obvious one. You can get immediate feedback from there as well. And then also, again, I think thank you page is a big piece. If people don't convert, let's say that you've built this campaign, you've put Facebook ads for a thing, you want them to convert on a form, like on a landing page, but they don't. You can also gain feedback about why they didn't convert on something or why they didn't take the next step. One of the questions that we ask for one of my clients whenever they actually bounce from a free trial is, what prevented you from signing up today? the feedback is astounding that you get. And not everyone's going to do it, and that's fine. But that is a way that you can kind of like hack the feedback process. If it's possible, I do think there are definitely tools that can help, but it is a process question. It's how can we improve the process to get the feedback? If you have gatekeepers, lean on leadership to help you get what you need. I know exactly what that's like. Oh.
Hi, I'm Michelle Hayward, founder of Positive Hires. Great to see you in person.
Great to
not
see
on
you in
Twitter.
person. Yeah.
My question is, I started building another company using my personal brand. And I have a business side and I have a user base.
Yeah.
So how would you advise me to get using my personal brand, my name, to grow my users for my tech company?
This is using your personal brand to drive people to the other business.
Exactly.
Okay. As you build out your personal brand, and this is actually a journey that I'm very much going on myself, you will start to take more and more opportunities to be put in front of your target audience. From a personal brand perspective, it's no different than any brand, really. But as you continue to produce content, as you continue to create the things that people are interested in, naturally, you will attract attention. People will start inviting you to different places, inviting people to speak, exactly like what's happening right now. You're a part of my marketing process. This ultimately will hit a capacity to where you're going to start focusing on, for your other business, how can you get in front of those people? How can you get in front of the people that you ultimately want to fuel towards that business? There's a ton of different things that you can do, from like if you have a newsletter, people can subscribe and keep up with you. There's always opportunity to say, hey, this is happening in my other business. Like, don't know if you know, but there's also this going on as well. Your personal brand is going to grow and expand over all of your years, obviously, of doing this. When you're ready to start using it for the other business, I would highly recommend using it for how can you get in front of the audience that you really want to be in front of. And both can happen at the same time. UserList is a great example. All of the founders of UserList all have personal brands, and not everyone's going to be a customer of UserList who likes them, right? But because they're out and they're present, it still drives people towards. Because people get curious. They're like, what is she up to? What's she doing? I want to know what else she's doing. What's her other side hustle? It's going to happen naturally. That's actually an example of earned media.